In recent days, Germany's new Chancellor Merz announced the lifting of restrictions on Ukraine using German long-range weapons to strike targets on Russian soil. Previously, Merz had also stated that Germany would no longer publicly disclose details of its arms aid to Ukraine. This signals that Germany's weapons support for Ukraine is entering a new phase 1 characterized by a deliberate disregard for Russian sensitivities, with the explicit goal of ultimately helping Ukraine win the war. Today, let's delve into this significant development. In fact, Germany is not alone. The UK, France, and the US have all recently announced the removal of range restrictions on weapons supplied to Ukraine. This is not a mere tactical adjustment, but a fundamental reconstruction of the strategic framework of the Russia-Ukraine war. Previously, Russia could strike targets across Ukraine at will, while Ukraine was confined to attacking only Russian forces within its own territory. That taboo is now shattered. Russia's rear zones are no longer safe, and the strategic depth it has relied on will vanish, potentially ushering in a dramatic turning point in the conflict. What long-range strike capabilities does Ukraine currently possess or stand to acquire? Let's outline the key systems. UK's Storm Shadow missile. With a range of 250 to 560 kilometers, this missile is already in combat use, having been fired by Ukrainian forces at Russian targets in Crimea. US Army Tactical Missile System, ATACMS. Boasting a range of 165 to 300 kilometers, ATACMS is designed for saturation strikes on troop concentrations and command centers. Ground-launched Small Diameter Bomb GLSDB. With a 150 kilometers range, this precision weapon targets Russian assembly areas both at the front and in rear zones. Ukraine's Neptune missile. The longest ranged at 1,000 kilometers, Neptune can theoretically cover all of Crimea and Russian naval ports in the south, though its stealth capabilities are reportedly inferior to Germany's Taurus missile. Harpoon anti-ship missile. Ranging 120 to 300 kilometers, Harpoon is critical for controlling maritime domains. German Taurus cruise missile most notable. With a 500 kilometers range and exceptional low-altitude penetration capabilities, Taurus once delivered will become Ukraine's most potent threat to Russian deep rear areas. This arsenal forms a systemic long-range strike matrix, enabling Ukraine to target Russian ammunition depots, command posts, radar stations, airfields, logistics networks, and even air bases and air defense systems on Russian soil. Until now, Russia has held a psychological and geographical advantage rooted in the unspoken rule that Ukraine would not strike Russian territory with Western weapons. Ukraine's previous cross-border attacks relied on domestically produced drones or limited-range weapons, posing minimal threat to Russia's military industry or civilian population, particularly in major cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, where many viewed the war as distant and irrelevant. This allowed the Russian government to sustain public tolerance even amid battlefield setbacks. But with Germany and other Western nations officially ending range restrictions, that era of impunity is over. For Russia, the distinction between frontline and rear will vanish. Key Russian hub cities near the border such as Belgorod, Rostov, and Kursk are now within direct missile range. Russia's logistical vulnerabilities will be brutally exposed. Its reliance on rail networks through flat, border-crossing terrain leaves supply lines perilously open to attack. High-value targets like the Engels strategic air base south of Moscow and the Tula missile brigade will face tangible threats for the first time. In short, the war will no longer be confined to Ukrainian soil, it will expand into Russia itself. German Chancellor Merz's recent announcement to lift restrictions on weapon ranges marks a historic turning point. Of particular significance is his persistent support for supplying Ukraine with the Taurus missile. Though official confirmation of delivery is pending, analysts believe his remarks are likely laying the groundwork for future public approval of such a move. The Taurus is critical for Ukraine because, unlike the range-limited US ATACMS missiles currently in use, it is the only weapon with both a 500 kilometers range and precision strike capabilities capable of penetrating hardened targets, filling a crucial gap in Ukraine's ability to strike deep into Russian territory. Notably, Russian leadership has yet to issue a formal response to this clear red line, crossing a stark contrast to their past threats of nuclear retaliation for similar escalations. In recent days, Russia has intensified airstrikes on Ukrainian civilian targets, a strategic move analysts say aims to inflict maximum damage before Ukraine's military capabilities escalate further. During his speech, Chancellor Merz explicitly referenced the US, stating Germany will continue purchasing American weapons to support Ukraine. He added with thinly veiled sarcasm, "As long as we pay, Trump is willing to sell the *," a telling remark reflecting European leaders' complex attitudes toward the US stance on Ukraine. As we've discussed before, Europe is increasingly prepared to shoulder more military and economic burdens while accelerating EU defense autonomy. The UK is speeding up laser weapon development. France has offered a nuclear umbrella to EU states. Poland is building the largest land army in Europe outside Ukraine. Germany has vowed to transform its Bundeswehr into Europe's strongest conventional force by 2031, with Parliament approving a defense budget hike from 2.1% to 5% of GDP, expanding troop levels to 240,000 and upgrading its fleet of fighter jets, tanks. Germany will also station 4,000 troops in Lithuania to reinforce NATO's eastern flank. In a paradoxical twist, Trump's policies have forced Europe's hand towards self-reliance. While the US may reduce its military footprint in Europe, this long-term shift could erode American influence on the continent. As EU nations strengthen domestic arms R&D production, US weapons sales in Europe will decline, and American manufacturers will face stiffer competition globally, consequences that may not be immediate but are inevitable if US-EU tensions persist. For Germany, historically constrained by post-World War II pacifist policies, the Ukraine war and Trump's rise have provided a double opportunity to dismantle self-imposed military limitations. Germany's vast defense industry capacity, long dormant, is set to fully activate in the coming years. While Trump may see reduced commitments to Europe as a burden lifted, Germans are likely toasting their newfound strategic freedom over being aware that industrial resurgence could reshape global power dynamics. As US policies drive brain drain in research while Europe invests in tech, America's global leadership in innovation could be challenged. History has shown that when left unprovoked, Germany is capable of defeating Russia militarily, and that remains true today. With range restrictions lifted, Ukraine is likely to adopt a strategy of targeting high-value military assets, ammunition depots, air bases, rail hubs while avoiding civilian cities or nuclear facilities, accompanied by diplomatic declarations framing strikes as defensive countermeasures to maintain moral legitimacy. Each missile fired will reinforce a narrative of proportional retaliation, preserving international goodwill. Chancellor Merz warned that the Russian regime views negotiations as weakness, urging preparation for a conflict longer than anyone imagines. The delivery of Taurus missiles would grant Ukraine the ability to strike targets on the outskirts of Moscow, bringing the war's reality to Russia's core population for the first time. This existential threat to civilians could translate into political pressure on the Kremlin, potentially forcing negotiations a more tangible outcome than Trump's rhetorical posturing. In short, Merz's decision may prove far more effective than empty rhetoric in bringing Russia to the table. Only time will tell how this historic shift reshapes the trajectory of the war and global power balances. Thanks for watching.